I try not to use mixed bus compression. I try to build it into it. Some songs start with the vocal and build around the vocal, and then you don't have to use compression as much. I mean, you can fix compression with expansion. So all these decisions are based on how it makes you feel, not so much how it makes it sound. The best way to understand compression is
Today, we discuss how to listen to and use compression along with different mixing techniques. Our guest is one of the most versatile engineers in the industry, having worked with Marilyn Manson, Jack Johnson, and the Mars Volta. Joining us today is the talented Robert Carranza. Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for joining us today.
thank you for having me.
What is the easiest way to understand compression?
I hate compression. I say that with stuff behind me, but I think people have a misunderstanding what compression is. It was always like a wrench, to fix something. It wasn't actually. Now we use it to create things, and we use it to create tone and dynamic and smash dynamics and parallel compression. But when I grew up, it was like an equalizer was not there to tone shape other than to tone fix. And I think compression is the same thing. The best way to understand compression is, I give this analogy a lot. When you're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, you can't fit that into a picture frame. And when you see it in a picture frame, you just don't feel what it is when you're standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. All this shape needs to get pushed into this smaller picture. And that's kind of where we've always been with stereo, So compression to me is it's utilitarian. It's like, this bass player wasn't as even, as I wish he was. So I'm gonna, adjust. Again, the attack is something that responds to, dynamics, right? The release is, based on timing of how much compression releases, and then makeup gain and, all that kind of shit. I have one of the most crazy compressors right there. It's the GML 8900. People are like, I never understood that. I still don't understand it. And I got guys who make hit records and they're like, and I'm like, and I got a tutorial from George himself. So it's like, it's one of the best compressors I ever used because it doesn't get in the way. You don't hear it as much as the way we like to use it now. I had again, the Bruce Lee had a funny statement he made to me, and I always repeat it, but he was like, "Kid, compression's for children," But it's a necessary evil. When you got someone who's not as even as you want them to play, they do it. I did a record with Michael Franti and Robbie Shakespeare, who is half of Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare, the best reggae section you ever work with. It's something you learn from musicians when you're working with them. We came in and we're recording, and he instantly heard the compressor I put on him. Instantly. And he was like, no compression. I'm the compressor. And he just adjusted his playing, and it sounded great. And it's one of those lessons you only learn from musicians. I had the same thing with David Hidalgo, put a compressor on him only as we were going live, right? We were tracking live and we hadn't even got sounds. And I just had a setup, but I put an LA2A on there just in case, we were going to go for it. And he instantly heard the LA2E kick in and he was like, no, take that off, man. And he would sit there and clap, play with his guitar, dig in and back the volume off and dig in a little more. And then he was like, okay, I'm there. And no compression needed. I know that's a long-winded answer for that, but
It's perfect. It's perfect.
That's the way I hear it, And again, and we had a format that was tape, and you could only go. I mean, tape is only plus 14. Can't go to plus 26 like you can on a console. So if you didn't manage the dynamic range, you go into saturation, right? So it's like any kind of inconsistent player. But then we also loved what that sounded like on drums. So yeah, it's a weird topic for me because it's a love-hate thing I have with it. Don't get me wrong. I use it because contemporary sound now is based on that,
Yeah.
music from now. I've been around for a while, and back in the '80s and in the early '90s, it's like it wasn't as prevalent as it is now.
Having that in mind, what is the best advice for learning how to listen to and use compression?
Yeah, I mean,
Because for me, it was so
it,
hard to listen to compression. I didn't get it. Like, is it compressing? So, do you have
well, the problem
any
with that
tips?
is it's always, yeah, it's really find a singer that's very dynamic.
Uh huh.
If you find a track that's very dynamic, someone who can really belt out and sing something when you have a real big dynamic range, I think that's the best utility to figure out how to use compressions because you're going to hear it grab,
Hmm.
um, and you're going to hear it do its thing without having to, a guitar player, I mean, a distorted guitar is compressed, so why are
Hmm.
you adding more compression to something that's already compressed? So I would use it's hard to hear on drums unless you kind of build a sound of a drum kit and then put compression on it.
Hmm.
That's easier, but the hearing compression on individual sounds, it's like it's that when you really don't hear the thwack of something. So for me it's like if you ever want to really hear compression, get a vocal track, put a compressor on it. It'll give you the fastest way of understanding what the attack does and what the release does. Because that's all compression really is, attack and release, and then your ratio. Um, and start with a high ratio first. You'll really hear it when you have a higher ratio, more into the limiting world.
Hmm.
8 to 1, 10 to 1, start there and then back it off as you see it. And one of the old tricks with compression was like with like a DBX 160, the VU meter was like,
Hmm.
well, you would take the threshold and take it all the way down, and then you adjust the ratio. So if you have 1 to 1, you're not hearing compression, but as you start turning the ratio up, you start hearing it better. You start hearing the attack and the release. So I think that would be I mean, those are automatic attack and release, but I think that's a great way of hearing compression.
Hmm.
Take your threshold midway down and then take your ratio all the way down and then adjust the ratio as the threshold stays there because it's compressing and adjust it so you hear it and then you start understanding what the tone does and what it does. I think that's a good
Hmm.
way.
Thank you for that. What would you say is the most common mistake someone makes when they're starting to use compression in their mixes?
Oh, interesting. I mean, there's no rules to any of this. So,
Hmm.
if it sounds good to your ear, great. You know, I mean, to me, the song, I say this all the time, and 1176 never wrote a great song, and it's true, but if you really, common mistakes would be um, too much compression. I mean, it's just kind of like the attack is too fast, the release is too fast, or sometimes it's the opposite where it's like, they didn't, you mean not hearing enough attack is never a bad thing, but then, uh, yeah, it's hard. I mean, because compression is, I mean, you can fix compression with expansion, you know, which is the opposite,
Hmm.
obviously. And yeah, so it's hard. Yeah, I mean, that's a hard question to answer, you know. But I see it a lot, and it sometimes you just gotta let it be what it is.
Hmm. And for those who are just starting out, is there or how can they nail vocal compression every time?
That's not. I mean, I still struggle with it. You can't. It's nothing. It's all based around getting the vocal in early
Hmm.
and how you build the track. A lot of people start with drums and bass and guitar and build the foundation up like that. Um, it's that side of it is important, but some songs start with the vocal, you know, and build around the vocal, and then you don't have to use compression as much, you know,
Hmm.
because that's your focal point. That's the dynamic, and I still use a console. I do mix in the box. I do both, depending on which one to me, depending on the music, I should say. and sometimes I'll use the console for certain music, and sometimes I won't. But building it up on a VU meter to me is still how you get balances. Like when I start on a in the box, I still have digital meter
Mm-hmm.
calibrated to -18, and I built into that. And then after that, I think I'd be lost without one, you know. And I even carry it with me on iLock when I go to places. So if I have it, I can use. But I think that would be it: is start with the vocal, build on the vocal, and then you can build everything around it. And I think that's your best way to start hearing. Like, oh, okay, that part jumps out way too much. I just need to back that little section down.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I mean, back earlier on the days when we didn't have Pro Tools and stuff, I used to uh, comp compression, where I would, not being lazy, but just automation was not great back then. So I would take the vocal track, and if I had an extra vocal track, I would print the verse section onto it,
Mm-hmm.
roll it back, and then I would drop it on the chorus where it was a little dynamic range, and I would just bring it down a little bit, instead of compressing. Because I
Mm-hmm.
always hear the attack of the compression, always. Now it's a matter of how much I want to hear it or not, how musical it can be. But that was a way, Again, it was like comping vocals. It's like I just take the voice, put it up a couple of dB because it just needed it, bring down the dB and just print to an extra track, and then put a light compression on that. And
Mm-hmm.
then I didn't hear the compression as much because I just did all the work sending to the channel onto another tape track. So you could build it that way too. That's an older way of doing it now. I don't think anyone wants to take the time to do that, but they'd
But if
rather
it
just slap a
works,
compressor on it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it worked.
Yeah, cool. So, can I mention some instruments and you share your favorite compressors
Sure.
for each one? So let's start with vocals.
Oh, vocal. I mean, there's no denying a blue 1176. Yeah, it just works. It just always works. 1176 will always work. But an Alley 2A, I've never been the fan of it on a vocal. A lot of people do. I still like the Alley 3A better
Mm-hmm.
on a vocal. It's like
Yeah.
it just works. It's simple. Two knobs,
Mm-hmm.
compression, gain.
Yeah. You're done. Yeah.
And it does all the rest. Yeah.
Cool. Acoustic guitars.
Oh, DVX 165A, especially with the limiter at the end.
Mm-hmm.
If you just tag it a little bit, it helps out.
Mix
That's
bus.
my
Yeah.
jam. Mix bus. I try not to use mix bus compression. I try to build it into it,
Mm-hmm.
especially now because people want stems so much that the minute you have a compressor on it and you got to do stems, all the balances are gone. And people are doing side chaining and all that kind of stuff, but it's like I'm still in that world of like sometimes digital and sometimes console. So but I mean the go-to's, I mean a G series, it
Mm-hmm.
just helps glue shit together a certain way. The you know the Shadow Hills over here I love a little, um and yeah, that would be it for me. I mean, when I need it, that's what I use.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Cool. What about drum rooms?
I try to do drum rooms, kind of like I print two separate tracks. I always print just the drum room, you know, no compression, nothing, kind of what is there, and then I'll do a parallel with it on a separate track, and you can't beat a TG
Mm-hmm.
on a drum room. You just can't. It's just like it grabs everything. Especially the Zener, like this one in the back here. You just with the
Mm-hmm.
attack and release, it's like you can vary it. The TG1 though that has auto attack and release is great as well. Um, but to me, that's the sound of a room. And you know, I think 1176 will work. 1178 will work. It's all a matter of taste. But Keypex, a Valley People, those things
Mm-hmm.
sound great too, especially with the smack. But to me, it's always been the compressed and the uncompressed, and I've been doing that forever. I mean, since God, forever, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
that works nicely.
Cool. Kick and snare.
Um, DBX 165, another one. It's like it just has it's a DBX 160 VU,
Mm-hmm.
but you control the attack and release. And then again, you have that little limiter on the end that just adds just the right amount of limiting and distortion. Because if you really slam that down, it just distorts as a motherfucker. But as you balance it, you can get that fine balance of like distortion in the bottom end, that modulation, and the snare drum. They're DBX 165As. I love them.
Mm-hmm. And piano.
Oof, piano. That's a book. Um, Mostly try not to use compression on a piano. Again, that thing of, that's such a dynamic instrument. I mean, I think that's about as dynamic as a snare drum,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but I have a thing called a boiler from Ridge Farm.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, my friend Palm designed it many years ago, and I still have a few of them, and they're falling apart, and I'm crying because they're falling apart. But I use that on piano when I really have a really dynamic piano player. It just grabs it a certain way, and a TG as well.
Mm-hmm.
TG sounds great on piano. The Zener more than the TG1 because you can control the attack and release, and you have the sidechain filter to help with that because sometimes some low notes will grab. But and then again, it depends on the piano. You know,
Mm, for sure.
I've
Yeah.
seen one of my mentors, Bernie Kirsch, who did all the Chick Corea records, the GRP band. I'd see him and he would never use compression on the piano. He would just turn it up. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's like, you know,
Hmm. Are
balance
there,
it out.
yeah. Are there times when you choose to use saturation instead of compression?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the thermiotic, well, Culture Vulture,
Mm-hmm.
thermionic, I think, or whatever, you
Yeah.
know, uh, which was a crazy, God, this was years ago. I was doing a record with a guy named Morgan who brought a Chesic Reach compressor, who I believe is the same person who makes that um, all the thermionic stuff, and it had like a little saturation knob on it. And this is like, God, I want to say late '90s, early 2000, like definitely. And yeah, it's great. I mean, saturation on it depends on what you're doing, is you already if you're doing something on a Neve and you crank it up a little bit to get some saturation out of the Neve, that's a different kind of saturation than a tube saturation or a triode or the pentode, you know. So yeah, I mean, the Culture Vulture's my go-to.
And speaking of saturation and distortion, I really love how it's used in Marilyn Manson's album, The Pale Emperor. I imagine many elements come from the recording, but how did you use distortion I can say that word in English. Creatively. Creatively. Did I say that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
creatively, yeah,
creatively on
that's
that
fine.
album. And how did you enhance it?
It's interesting. That record was, Tyler Bates produced, and Tyler's amazing at I mean, he's a film composer, so
Uh-huh.
he's already knows how to bake stuff in, and kind of go like, well, this is what we're going for, but we want more, or just a little bit more. And I tease him a lot because he's becoming a really good mixer on his own. Just
Hmm.
of course, eventually you start learning and you do it and you do it for years and you start knowing how to balance frequencies, how to balance stuff. So he would come in and just go like, I like it, sounds great, just a little bit more color here and a color there, and yeah, I was kind of left to my own devices on it. So saturation in that record is again, we don't have tape anymore. So it's kind of the only way to create that harmonic distortion and sometimes the impact of that first hit note. Because, even I don't care what you are, that transient that comes through, I don't care about, the fastest compressor can't catch it, you know, and you can you can catch it with saturation. It's like it's almost immediate. Not as immediate, but pretty close to it.
Mhm.
So saturation on that record, I mean, it's there. But man, it's hard to say because there was times when, you go like, man, that bass drum just is not working, or um, I need something more. And in doing hip hop and stuff like that, you go like, yeah, well, the best way to get an 808 to cut is to put a little distortion on it.
Mhm.
You're not going to hear it on tiny speakers. You're not going to hear it, but you put a little saturation on it, and it creates that harmonics up the octaves, and it all of a sudden, what you couldn't hear, you feel a little bit more, and you hear just a little bit of it. So yeah, it's such a broad question. It's like, from one song to the other. One of the things that for that record was like, we wanted things to be clean,
Mhm.
but we didn't want things to be too clean. So certain elements are clean, and certain elements are definitely just busted up, and that goes from, again, the culture vulture, decapitator, lo-fi, the boiler. The boiler has a little mode in it that's a distortion mode, to God, Sansamp, to the original Sansamp pedal, and again, if you kind of go on this journey to look for something that works, and if you have the time, then you can find something that works perfectly. So out of all those, that's all in those records, all those saturators. And I even have a 4-track that I run to this day, Porter One, and those little preamps on it when they saturate and break up, you know. And I'll take a cassette, run something on it, and then just fly it back into. It's long. It's not Pieces aren't long enough to not have to be able to worry about time compression. You can just fly it in and go like, oh, it's good. It works. It's just enough to give me the sound I want, and then fly it back in.
Mhm.
So I
I
use
was
everything.
cool. I was looking for the credits of that album, and of course I couldn't find them. But I couldn't find who recorded that album. Did you record that album, or did you just mix
Yeah,
it?
me and Tyler.
Oh,
No, me and
cool.
Tyler. Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, that's the other problem with this business, huh? No credits anywhere. I mean, I think
Yeah,
iTunes just started adding credits, but you have to
I don't
click
know.
on. So if you, no, no, if you go to iTunes now and you play a song
Hmm.
and it's in the foreground
Oh,
and you click on the three little dots,
okay, I will
you
do
can
that.
see view credits, and it'll start showing people
Hmm.
the credits for everything.
Yeah.
No one's ever talked about it, but like, yeah. So yeah, Tyler was it's basically me and Tyler. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Cool. So, do you remember the vocal chain for recording and mixing Marilyn Manson for that album?
It's very different per song. Very different per song. Vocal chain wise was sometimes was an SM7.
Hmm.
Sometimes it was a Manley reference cardioid, and then sometimes it was the Soyuz 17.
Uh-huh.
So that was getting in, and mostly going through a Chandler mic pre, and then on mixing, it was no compression, just distortion boxes, kind of running in parallel, or wet mix kind of things, and then the complex,
Uh-huh.
a lot of complex on that vocal chain on mixing. Yeah.
And if you use distortion for the vocals, it was during the mixing process.
No, most of the time it was kind of print, but there were times when it would be like, it's not working. Give me a clean version, and Manson would actually re-sing it,
Uh-huh. Cool.
and then I would, you know, and then we kind of started figuring out, well, let's have some distortions where he could hear, but not print it, and we'll have two tracks, one a little bit more blown out and one
Uh-huh.
clean, and then I could make that decision later on mixing. Because
Hmm.
again, you're building a house, you don't know what the table's going to look like in the house. You're building a foundation, you're building walls, and then you start getting into the details of things, and you can't go like, well, you know I don't know, that end table looks great there, but what if this other one, or the lamp or whatever? So that it's those fine details that you kind of have to worry about later. So that record was very thought out, but at the same time, we thought about it in a practical way so that we had room to do more stuff in the mix.
Cool. And what about effects? How much of those effects came from the recording, and how much were just from mixing?
I would say the recording side of it, we always have this philosophy: if it's something you want to keep forever, just record it, bake
Mm-hmm.
it in. It's fine, And again, that can put you in a corner sometimes because you're baked into something. But the way we would solve that was like, well, okay, well, that part we're playing on top of it doesn't work with the vocal in a weird way, so that part. And that was kind of the other way of fixing it. But I would say 50-50. There were some things that were baked in and then some things that were done in the mix, especially reverbs and delays. Like it was always a continuation of what kind of was there. But you got to remember, as you're building a record, you're kind of making decisions as you're going. And it's like, well, we take that delay away, and then Manson would be like, oh, what happened to that sound? It sounded more interesting. You put a different delay on it. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
no, no, go back to the other one. I like that. And that's because he's been hearing it that way for weeks and months,
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid of that. It's like, cool. So things change, but reverbs, delays, modulation stuff. I mean, again, some gets baked into the sound, some didn't. I think we use most of that's some Valhalla and Bricasti.
Mm-hmm.
Delay wise, the H delay is one of our favorites, and the Sound Toys delay. Yeah, most of that stuff now is delay wise. I used to have a bunch of delay units, and they just they don't work anymore. And to get parts to fix them is almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another thing I really love about that album is the bass, especially the distortion. How did you achieve that sound? Did you use multiple bass tracks?
No, if I remember correctly, always a P bass or a
Mm-hmm.
Schecter um, straight in. We used to have they have this. Tyler has this Noble
Oh,
direct box, and then sometimes we go straight into a Sans amp,
really? Oh,
and that was it.
cool.
There's no amp on any of that record, not a single amp.
Whoa,
And
amazing.
and even when we had distortion on something, and I was like, I want more. I'd run it again through the Sans amp, twice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those things are incredible boxes. And when I mean the Sans amp, I mean the real Sans amp. The guitar pedal or the bass one. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and yeah, that was it. Direct. You know,
Cool,
and Tyler's primarily playing bass and all of that.
cool. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What difference or what differences do you find in your technique for adding dynamics in the mix when working with Marilyn Manson compared to Jack Johnson?
Oh, well, the difference is incredible because with someone like Jack, you're just taking a picture of what's there. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you want all that dynamic range. You want to feel him as he leans into the vocal mic and backs off of it. You want to get that dimension. You want the snare drum to not go ping, it's go pa, you want the bass drum to kind of most of Jack's records are more about the song kind of hugging you and making you feel like you're just like your ears to him, where Marilyn Manson, it's all about aggression. It's all about like making you feel uncomfortable. Part of the sound design is basically like, okay, well, how much distortion can I put on the snare drum when it's too much? Well, that's too much. Well, go further, go more, so it's,
Uh-huh.
you know, and that kind of thing. And that creates a feeling as well. So all these decisions are based on how it makes you feel, not so much how it makes it sound.
Mm-hmm.
So, the dynamic range is what it is. But the problem with some of the heavier music that, you do is, well, when it all sounds like a train coming at you, there's no levity. How do you create release? So a lot of that is balances and mixing. You know, it's like it's. There's one song. I just finished the new Marilyn Manson record.
Really? Cool.
Yeah, the singles are out right now. If you want
Oh.
to hear them, but there's some songs that are really just kind of like again a freight train, and it needs to sound that way. Um, it's kind of the problem I have with some of the modern music. You your ear starts fatiguing 20 seconds into the fucking record or the song,
Hmm.
and there's no dynamics there where it's like there's no relief. So a lot of that is by design, but a lot of it is like, okay, like I've definitely done it where I mix something and Tyler's like, dude, it's two balls to the walls from the top to the end. He was like, just back off some stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it. And he was like, did you hear the rough I sent you? I'm like, no, I didn't listen to it. So I just went for it. But, that's my instincts. And then you have someone, the producer who comes in and says, nah, this is kind of, do this or that. And there's moments when I do that. And he was like, go ball to the wall. And then I'll be like, yeah, but look at, man, coming out of this pre-chorus and the chorus just goes bam.
Hmm.
That's exciting. That's like a live concert. We're always trying to emulate what a live concert feels like. Again, we come back to that analogy of standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. You just can't replicate that. When you got a PA system in a room and you got thousands of watts of power, you can't make that happen out of speakers. Speakers are emotionless things, but we have to create emotion to come through them.
What's
So
most of the
creating dynamic range is the only way. Yeah.
what's most of the album Sleep Through Static recorded live?
A lot of it was, and a lot of it was done to tape.
Hmm.
Um, JP Pugnier, who's a producer of that record, JP's great. Done a lot of records with Ben Harper, a lot of bands. He's a great guy. Jack at the time had never recorded onto tape, and was like, I would love to. And I was like, okay, great, but tape has a drawback. The drawback with tape is you got to be like really good to do it. And they were a really good band. And most of the time, we would record the band bass, drums, and guitar. And you get a rhythm section, kind of like the Motown style,
Hmm.
or Marley, and with tape, it was like, well, it's not like Jack puts, we're not doing 48 tracks of tracks on a Jack Johnson record, but he likes to experiment, he likes to try things. So tape was like, okay, this is what we're doing, and there were moments there where it was like, oh shit, we need a tambourine track. And then I'd be like, okay, well, this, we don't really need two overheads. And he'd be like, what do you mean? I'm like, let me just balance the toms and the overheads together onto a stereo track. And then it gives us a few more tracks to do, tambourine on. And then he'd be like, we can do that? I'm like, yeah. He was so used to just like, oh, we have unlimited tracks,
Hmm.
so it was fun for him because he started to see the techniques of the past with what it was now. And it's really live. There are moments in there where it's like, yeah, there's a fuck up. Who cares? Sounds great. Let's talk about the fuck up 10 years from now if you can really tell me where it
Yeah.
was at. Doesn't
Hmm.
matter. So, yeah, it was fun doing that record that way. Yeah. And JP was always like in the background going, let's do it. Let's do it. Go.
How do you use the bleed from different microphones to add more dimension?
Oh, it's everything. It's everything. You know, uh, Bleed is something that nowadays we frown upon, and we try to get it out there as much as possible. I mean, we're creating tools. I don't think I've I don't think I've used a gate on a snare in 10 years. You
Hmm.
know, like I haven't. Put the mic in the right place, get the balance right, you're good to go. You know, especially with piano and you putting piano and drums in a room. Like the crucial part where that is kind of like where how far the piano is away from the drums. Because the further away the piano is, the more it's going to sound like a ambient mic for the kit. So, put the mics, put that fucking drum set right by the piano if you can, and you're gonna get less. You'll be surprised how much less bleed you're getting, um, and how much it helps the drum sound. You know, that's an old technique that it's like I learned talking to Rudy Van Gelder. Who did all the I mean all the fucking jazz records in back in the day, and you know, bleed is something that if you have a great musician who plays really good and kind of balances himself, especially a drummer, bleed's great. You're never going to hear it, but you're going to feel it. And if you hear it, that's fine too. It just, I've done a lot of records where the bleed has always been like that's riding the vocals up and down, and people are like, "Why does the balance change a little bit?" I'm like, "Well, this." They're like, "No, that sounds great," and they don't even know what it is. They just feel it.
Hmm.
They're like, "It just feels great." So I'm a big fan of it. It's like again, uh, especially like microphones, drums, guitars in a room. I always back mics off the guitar amp. It's like they're not right on the grill. They are
Hmm.
sometimes for certain sounds, but most of the time, 6 feet. I mean, 6 feet inches away, and just you get a little bit of bleed into that microphone. It's funny when you start isolating things, and you're like, "Oh shit, part of my drum sound went away." Or a part of that upright bass sounds different now, So you just got to be smart where you put the instruments out in the room, make the
Hmm.
difference.
Cool. I just love how Jack's vocals sound, like this super dry kind of sound. I love it. So, do you remember the how he records it and how'd you mix it?
Yeah, I mean it's a funny story. We when we started, Mario Caldato, one of the producers of the many, we have a rotating chair of people that we just work with. Sometimes I'm producing and engineering, sometimes I'm just engineering, so it's kind of a family job,
Mm-hmm.
family affair kind of thing. Mario brought in his 47 that he had, and it sounded great. It was like it's real close, but it was interesting because Alan from Telefunken one day was like, "Hey man, I would love for Jack to check out our mics." And I was like, "Okay." So he sent over a demo,
Mm-hmm.
U47, and it sounded fantastic. And I was like, "Dude, you're not getting this mic back." And he was like, "What?" I was like, "No, man, this is." He was, "But that's a demo mic." I said, "I don't care. It's like, you know, just send us the bill, you know."
Uh-huh.
And we have that. And again, it's nothing. I wish I could take credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's that mic with Jack singing in it, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly any compression on it. I mean,
Oh.
I think it's an LA2A that will hit a dB or two at the most, but that's it. Jack's such an amazing singer, and he knows how to work the mic. He definitely knows how to work the mic, and it's gotten great at it. And yeah, that's. I wish
Mm-hmm.
I could say like there's some fancy chain that
No,
created that. No,
that's
it's
perfect.
him.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Cool.
his voice.
And when there are double vocals, how do you process them? Because I've seen people EQing the top end or use more aggressive de-essers on them or things like that.
No, nothing like that at all. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a vocal. The only thing I change on sometimes I'll swap a mic out to do backgrounds, just so that there's
Uh-huh.
just an inherent difference, you know. Um, but a lot of the time, what I'll do is I'll tell the singer just to take a step back, and that changes everything, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And it's just enough for it to blend, you know, the same circuit coming down the line, the same speed of the microphone, you know. But when you take a step back, all of a sudden something else opens up and it becomes uh, the same but different. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same way I do strings sometimes when we're to a small string section, a four piece. They walk into the room and they're like, "Wait, I thought it was only a four piece." And I got all these chairs set up. And I went, "No, no, that's a when you do the double, you go
Mm-hmm.
sit in the other chair,
Hmm.
and we're keeping the mics in the same place, but we're moving you, and then we go back one more layer, and then we have three layers to work with, and the whole tone changes." You know, So that's kind of how I like to do backgrounds. But again, with other people, just sing a double.
Hmm.
It sounds great. Maybe when it comes to mixing, I'll maybe take some bottom out, just like a low shelf, all the way up to like the upper mid range, because it's like we don't need any more bottom end. We just need the dictation.
Hmm.
So that will somehow blend a vocal together, um, by frequency than it is by uh, like a double. That doesn't work, or they're not singing it exactly the way you're supposed to. So that's another way of doing it.
Hmm. And how do you get the singer into the right mood, emotionally connected, rather than worrying about the technical aspect of singing?
That is just years and years of being prepared. You have them walk up to a microphone. I mean, come on, depending on the microphone, depending on the guy, you pretty much know where to set the preamp. You pretty much know where the fucking compressor needs to be or the limiter needs to be or whatever. And then but one of the things is I always ride. I always like to have a fader
Hmm.
that I can ride a little bit and learn the song. And as he's changing, ride into it. So if he's a little softer in the verse, couple dB up, gets a little excited in the chorus, write it down. Um, but getting a singer ready to do a vocal, I mean, God, that's a book. you know, Most of that is based on where they want to be, if they're in the mood. So I follow their lead all the time. But the biggest thing is creating a space where they feel comfortable, where they feel relaxed, where it's like they don't think of it as like, well, I'm about to do the vocal that everyone's going to hear for the rest of my life. That's not what they think. It's just like, oh, let me do this vocal right now. I got an idea. Okay, you keep it, and maybe you're going to beat it later, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, this is pretty good, and you're like, yeah, I can beat it. We'll do it later. Later never comes, and that's fine. So I think perspective on how to do a vocal is like sometimes we put too much into it. We've actually make it more than it needs to be, and then that freaks the singer out more. Let me put these lights, let me get all this shit going, and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't know I was doing this right now. You know what I mean? That becomes pressure. That
Hmm.
becomes like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'm doing it now. I got to do it. No, I don't like to create that. We kind of just do it when you do it. There's you know, no pop and circumstance to it. It's like, I'm going to do a vocal. Okay, great, good vocal. And then sometimes he'll be like, hey, turn the lights down a little bit, you know, follow their lead. A musician always knows. One of the things as a record producer, as an engineer, listen to the musician. They're going to lead you. You just got to pay attention. That's kind of the years and years of being an assistant, of knowing to pay attention and stay in the room. A lot of days now, a lot of the assistants don't even stay in the room. They kind of set you up and they leave. And you're
Hmm.
like, no, 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 dude, this is where you're going to actually learn. Because this engineering job, record production job, it's not about making records with, a fader and, preamps. It's about people.
Hmm.
It's about, working with people. That's where that comes in. So, making the vocal more than what it needs to be. I don't play that game. It's just kind of, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And, if the singer wants to put some lights on, great. Wants to, hang some lights up and, whatever he needs to do, I'm down, you
Hmm.
know?
So talking about people, what are the most important lessons you've learned from musicians?
Oh God, there's thousands. But the most important thing I've ever learned from musicians is that I'm not important in the room. They are. And you got to
Hmm.
understand the difference. Like technically I'm there, you know, to technically do things,
Hmm.
but I'm only there to interpret for them what they want to get across. So, like I had a friend who I was just recently talked to, and he was like, we were talking about a record he didn't get, you know, he was kind of bummed out. And he was like, ah, man, I wish I got that record. And I was like, yeah, it's all good, man. Like whoever got it, they're going to do a great job. And you're going to get to enjoy that record because you didn't get to do it, you know? So it's something to look forward to. I love records that I didn't get that I'm like, I wouldn't have done that, but
Mm-hmm.
they did. And they did it that way. And I get to enjoy it now because most of the time, the records I make, you do them, you maybe hear them every once in a while, you know?
Mm.
It's you go back and go like, oh yeah, and you remember how good it sounded or whatever. You're like, oh cool, that was pretty good. But you're not listening to them every day. You're not even listening to them every year. So, you know, that's one of the things about musicians that they come in and, I have a pretty great, it's an interesting story. I did Los Lobos live at the Fillmore, and those guys were busy and they were out on the road, and I was feeding them, stuff to listen to on the road. And one day they had the day off where they all could talk to me, and I was at the studio, and I'm on this 100 input SSL, but I was in a mobile truck with an Dominio API when I tracked it, and it was like, and they were like, "Hey man," I was like, "What do you think?" How do they're like, Steve Berlin goes, "Did you listen to the rough mix you made from the truck?" And I was like, "No, I didn't." He goes, "Why don't you listen to that and call us back?" And I put it on, and the first song, I was like, "Oh."
Mm.
I called him back and said, "I get it. I'll talk to you guys in a couple of days." I turned to the assistant and said, "Pull everything down, take every patch out." And he was like, "What?" And we were there for 5 days already, and I started over. And I just simply brought the faders up and got balances. And they were right. The rough sounded great. And again, it's just those things listening to musicians, especially if a musician who's like, "Hey, I can't hear myself."
Mm-hmm.
You got to understand what that means. That means I can't perform. That means I'm not feeling this, which means he's not going to play the way he should play. You know, it's all those little things in a studio when you're listening to. One of my things was when I was an assistant. I listened to musicians and I kind of attacked the problem before they had the problem. If someone said like, "Dude, can someone? I don't know where I left my pencil." By the time I heard that, I had four pencils in my hand, going into the room and putting them on the stand. And then he'd go like, "Oh, shit, thanks, man." I don't want him to think about that,
Mm-hmm.
And it's hundreds of things like that you learn from musicians. And again, I was a drummer in a band. I know what it was, but a certain level of musicianship, all you want them to do is have a creative horizon. So you want to make that road smooth for them and just
Mm.
let them go down that road with a creative horizon. So that anything that's in the way, just fucking get it out of the way for them, and you're gonna get the best out of musicians out of the way. And
Mm-hmm.
that goes true for anybody from Marilyn Manson to Los Lobos to Jack to everything in between.
Cool.
Musicians really want to feel like they're not being told what to do, but that you care enough to listen to them. I mean, all musicians are very, it's very fragile. I've been with some people who've had life altering experiences in the studio when I've been with them. Parents passing away, uh, I mean, everything. And you're in a studio with them and you're experiencing that same, you know, the news, the good news, the bad news. Oh, my wife's pregnant. Oh, my father just died. Everything. And you got to respect that, and go and understand where some of this stuff comes from. I had an interesting girl I was working with, and she was crying every time she got to the chorus.
Mm.
And, she was saying this line. And I was like, "Hey, every time you get to the chorus, you're breaking down." And she was like, "Well, that's what I was saying when I was being raped." And you're like, "What do you say to that?" And it's like, you don't say anything. You got to be understanding and you got to let her go through it. I mean, she's
Mm-hmm.
singing the mantra she sang in her head while something very terrible was happening to her.
Mm.
And for her to even write about it is crazy to me. But
Mm-hmm.
that's where we are. We're dealing with musicians who are putting themselves out there to say, like, these are the scars I have. I'm going to show them to you, and not all, and it's not all bad. There's some people who are like happy about things or whatever, but you know, They also are just a sharing expression. So it's important to have everything kind of set up and ready to go. So when they walk in, you know, um, I'll just give you one more tiny one. So I was with Los Lobos and we were doing 110th Street with Bobby Womack. And Bobby Womack walks into the room. And the funny thing is, I didn't know this was happening until after, but Bobby Womack walks in and he was like, hello, hello. And like, hi, Mr. Engineer. Like, doesn't want to know your name, right? Hi, Mr. Engineer. Goes, where am I at? Oh, I'm over here. Okay, great. One, two, three, four. Boom, they start fucking playing the song. He sings the song down and then he comes back and he goes, what do you think, Mr. Engineer, man? And I was like, fucking sounding fucking great. And he was like, great. And he was like, out of the door, gone. He was in the studio for, I swear to you, 15 minutes. The assistant comes in and goes like, he had his limousine driver not turn the car off. He didn't even park. He was double parked outside the studio and he went in, sang the part, did it, and went back to the car and left. No fucking around. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's like, I know what I'm doing. Don't waste my time.
Uh-huh. That was funny. Uh, I have some questions from our audience now. The first one is, what is the number one mistake that causes people to disconnect from the song?
Distraction, social media, being on your phone all day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can only imagine if Picasso had a fucking Instagram account or Michelangelo,
Uh-huh.
you know, distraction. Be in the moment, be there,
Mm-hmm.
be everything about being there.
So another question here. Was there any special ritual or routine that Manson had before recording?
No, I mean, I wish I could say like, blah, 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 but there's not.
No.
It's
Okay.
like, creative people just come in and get creative.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, it's just that thing of like, we're here, cool. I mean, it's funny to watch a session start when everybody walks in and everybody drinking their coffee or having a little bite to eat, and all of a sudden you just see people walking to the room. You see another person walk into the room. They pick up their instrument. They start fucking around. The bass player starts playing. The drummer sits at the kit and starts playing a little bit, and you're like, oh, roll.
Mm-hmm.
You got to pay attention to those things. It's like there's no, every ritual is different. It's like, again, one guy would be like, yeah, I got to eat. I got to eat before I play, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And Gil Sharon, the drummer on that record, Gil's like, depending on the time, breakfast burrito, lunch, what are we
Uh-huh.
eating? Because when he fuels up, he goes and he'll go. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, God, he'll play for hours and hours and give you options and play this and that. And it's like, that's his ritual. Everyone kind of comes in and does whatever they want. With Jack, it's the morning surf. If the fucking waves are good,
Yeah.
we're not working until they're bad.
Uh-huh.
And you sit around and respect that because that's going to put him in this state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Sure.
and then there's other people that just walk in and want to get straight to business. We got 10 hours to be here. Let's not waste a minute. And then sometimes you're like, hey, man, I got to fucking eat. I'm starving. And then there's some people who are like, eat while we work,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you got to adapt to what that is. So there's no real ritual. Uh, Everyone's different.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody.
Cool. What is the best way to use samples on drums?
Samples are a funny thing um, because I'm not afraid to use a sample at all. What I like to do is create the sample, though.
Mm.
You know, it's like, well, okay, this drummer's a little inconsistent, and compression's not going to fix that. Hitting a snare drum the wrong way is not going to, no compressor is going to fix that. No EQ is going to fix that. So you're going to have to fly something in. So most of the time after a drum track, I always take samples and then I'll create the sample. But a good creative way of samples is like, you know, um, have I used them? Sure. Have I not used them? Absolutely. Um, I don't look at samples as a bad thing. I look at them as something that later on where you're like creatively have to go like, shit, this is not working and you got to make it work. You got to do what you got to do. It's just what it is. So samples for me are one of those things where if you can sound as natural as possible with something that sounds natural, you're all good. If you're working on something like Manson, where you're trying to create something that's a little bit more industrial or, um, you know, a little more frightening or something, it's like you do what you have to do and then fly it in. Most of the time, the samples I fly in, if when they are, is kind of like they're destroyed somehow, and
Mm-hmm.
they just add something um, to the bigger picture, but they're not usually relying on that unless you're going for that. I mean, what is an 808 snare to a hip hop song? It's everything. What's
Mm-hmm.
the 808 to a hip hop song? It's everything. So those things are kind of what we're imprinted on, as opposed to a real kick drum on a hip hop song. You know,
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole other animal.
So another question here is, how do you back up all your material?
Oh God, relentlessly. I always say if you don't have three backups, you don't back up.
Uh-huh.
And the way I back up is there's always a work drive, so that's A, and then there's the backup drive, which is C, and then there's the everything drive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's A, B, and C. A is the work drive. B gets backed up. B gets backed up to C, and then I start getting rid of shit because it's like I'm not, anything that's unnecessary, it's gone. And then when a record's done, A becomes the work drive gets erased. B becomes the drive that everything is on, and C becomes the consolidated drive where all the tracks in the session, you just get everything from the top to the end and hit consolidate. And it's all one track now, like a multi-track.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes the final backup. All the extra audio, all the extra vocal takes. Like, nowadays it's like, oh shit, I want to save all that shit because, no, that's garbage picking. That's going through the garbage. That's not what people want to hear. They want to hear the end. So, but I will keep that version. So the main version is the everything backup, and then there's always two consolidated backups that are just the tracks that are in the session. So years from now, someone goes, "You have those tracks? Yeah, here it is. Boom." They can load it in Pro Tools, Logic, and it start from bar one, and you're good. It's like a multi-track. That's the way I
Mm-hmm.
back stuff up. And
Oh.
now it's all SSDs because it
Mm-hmm.
just saves time. And I used to have like 600 hard drives in my garage, and now there's a box of hard drives for the past, for backup, since the God, even ADAT stuff and D88 stuff got transferred to Pro Tools,
Uh-huh.
and there's a every 6 months they get turned on and rebacked up to new drives. That's my
Oh.
backup scheme. Three
Mm-hmm.
backups. Yeah.
Robert, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.